My name is Ruth. You don't expect your life to fracture on a day meant for celebration. You just don't. You imagine cracks might appear on an ordinary Tuesday or in the deep, quiet hours of a sleepless night. But on a day filled with forced laughter and the cloying sweetness of store-bought cake, you think you're safe. I thought I was safe. My 65th birthday was a masterpiece of subtle condescension, painted in the pastel colors of aging gracefully. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The party was at my son, David's, house, a sprawling, sterile thing that always felt more like a museum exhibit than a home. "We'll handle everything, Mom," he'd said, his voice a smooth, practiced bomb over the phone. "You just relax, you've earned it." At the time, I'd felt a warm flicker of gratitude. Now, I recognized the first, faint whisper of the lie. I arrived wearing the lavender dress my friend Grace had helped me pick out. "It brings out the silver in your hair, Ruth," she'd said, her hands patting my shoulders. "Makes you look like a wise queen. Auntie Grace, everyone calls her, though she's no blood relation to either of us. She's the sister of my soul." When I walked into David's cavernous living room, her was the first genuine smile I saw, a beacon of warmth in a sea of perfunctory pleasantries. The room was full of people, yet it felt hollow. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, flitted about like a nervous dragonfly, adjusting a bouquet of lilies here, straightening a stack of napkins there. Her smile was tight, a little stitch of stress above her jaw. "Ruth, you're here. David, your mother's here." And then he was there, my firstborn, my David. He kissed my cheek, his lips cool and dry. "Happy birthday, Mom. You look restful." Restful. It was such a strange word. Not beautiful, not vibrant. Restful. As if I were a patient in a sanatorium or a piece of furniture that had been recently reupholstered. I pushed the thought away, chalking it up to the sensitivity that had plagued me since Robert, my husband, passed 2 years ago. Grief makes you porous, you see. Every comment, every look, seeps into the cracks. It was after the cake, a towering, fondant-covered affair that tasted of sugar and nothing else, that the air in the room changed. David stood, clinking a fork against his champagne flute. The room fell into a syrupy silence. "Mom," he began, his voice taking on a polished, public tone. "We're all so happy to celebrate you today. 65 years. It's a monumental milestone." He paused, letting a ripple of agreeable murmurs pass through the crowd. "And as we look at you, so full of, well, of a life well lived, we can't help but think about your future, your comfort, your safety." My spine straightened almost imperceptibly. Next to me, I felt Auntie Grace go still. "We all know the big house is too much for you now," David continued, his smile benevolent. "All those stairs. The garden Robert loved so much, it's becoming overgrown. It's a burden, Mom, and we don't want you to bear burdens anymore." Chloe moved to his side, slipping her hand into his. "We want you to be secure," she added, her voice sweet as poison. "To be somewhere you can truly relax, without a worry in the world." I found my voice, though it felt thin and reedy. "The house isn't a burden, David. It's my home. My memories are in every floorboard." David's smile didn't falter, but it tightened at the corners. "Memories are wonderful, Mom, but we have to be practical. We have to think about your well-being. That's why, as our gift to you," he gestured grandly, "we've made all the arrangements. You're going to love the Oaks. It's more of a resort than a retirement community. There's bingo and bridge, and all your meals are prepared for you. No more worries, no more responsibilities. Just peace." The room erupted in a chorus of, "Oh, how wonderful!" and "What a thoughtful gift!" But the voices sounded distant, muffled, as if I were hearing them from the bottom of a well. The Oaks. I'd heard of it, a beautiful, gilded cage. A place where you went to wait, comfortably, for the end. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. This wasn't a gift, this was a coup. They were staging a friendly takeover of my life, and they were doing it in front of an audience to make refusal seem like madness, like ingratitude. I looked at my son's face, the face I had cradled as a baby, scrubbed clean of playground dirt, beamed at during graduations. I searched for the boy and the man, but all I saw was a stranger wielding concern like a weapon. My gaze swept over Chloe's triumphant little smile, over the nodding, approving faces of relatives and family friends who saw only a dutiful son, not an executioner. Auntie Grace's hand found mine under the table. Her grip was fierce, an anchor in the sudden, violent storm. She leaned in, her whisper a hot, furious breath in my ear. "They are boxing you up, Ruth. They are wrapping you in pretty paper and putting you on a shelf. Don't you let them." But what could I do? Stand up and scream, 'cause a scene. I was Ruth, the quiet widow, the gentle mother. I was restful. So I did the only thing I could. I smiled, a small, tight, terrible smile. I let the tears that were threatening to fall instead retreat, freezing into a hard, cold knot in the center of my chest. "Thank you, David," I heard myself say, my voice miraculously steady. "It's a very generous thought." That was the moment the fracture became a chasm. As the applause died down and people went back to their cake, I sat there, a 65-year-old woman at her own birthday party, and I understood with a clarity that was both terrifying and absolute. They weren't seeing me. They were seeing a problem to be solved, an asset to be managed, a life that was essentially over. They had called me old, and they had called me useless. And in that moment, surrounded by the trappings of a love I now knew was conditional, I made a silent vow to myself, to Robert, to the woman I used to be. I would be neither. The party ended with a slow, syrupy drip of goodbyes, each one a small, sharp needle. "You're so lucky, Ruth. What a relief for you, no more worries." They kissed my cheek, their perfumes mingling into a nauseating cloud, and I smiled my brittle smile until my face ached with the effort of it. David and Chloe walked me to my car, a sensible sedan that suddenly felt like my last remaining possession of any consequence. "We're so excited for you, Mom," Chloe said, her arm linked through mine in a parody of support. "The orientation tour is on Tuesday. I'll pick you up at 10. It wasn't a question, it was a decree. David opened my car door. "Get some rest, Mom. You look tired." There it was again. Rest. Tired. The vocabulary of my obsolescence. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded, slid into the driver's seat, and focused on the simple, mechanical act of starting the engine, backing out of the driveway, and pulling away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't bear to see them standing there, a united front, already the curators of my former life. I drove on autopilot, the familiar streets a blur. But I didn't turn towards my own house, towards the silence and the shadows that now seemed to hold a new, menacing quality. Instead, I found myself pulling up outside a small, cozy cottage with a front garden that was a glorious, unkempt riot of color. This was Auntie Grace's house, her sanctuary, and now mine. She must have seen my headlights, because the front door swung open before I even reached it. She stood there, still in her party clothes, her face etched with a fury that was far more comforting than any pity. "Get in here," she said, her voice low and tight. She didn't wait for an answer, just turned and marched into her kitchen. I followed, the dam of my composure finally breaking as I crossed her threshold. The tears came then, hot and silent, streaming down my face as I slumped into a chair at her familiar, scarred wooden table. Grace didn't try to hug me or offer platitudes. She busied herself with the primal therapy of making tea. The slam of the kettle on the stove, the clatter of mugs, the aggressive rattle of the tea tin, it was a symphony of solidarity. Those. She searched for a word vile enough, settling on a hissed, vipers. I let out a wet, choked sound that was half laugh, half sob. They're my children, Grace. They are sharks, she corrected, slamming a mug of steaming, oversteeped English breakfast in front of me. Smelling blood in the water. Your blood. She sat down opposite me, her eyes blazing. The Oaks, Ruth? They might as well have shipped you off to a warehouse. Did you see the look on Chloe's face? She was already mentally redecorating your living room. I wrapped my hands around the hot mug, letting the scalding heat ground me. What am I going to do? They've made all the arrangements. It's done. It is not done. Grace's fist came down on the table, making the spoons jump. It is not done until you sign the papers. And you, my dear friend, are not going to sign a thing. But how do I fight this? I whispered, the enormity of it crushing me. It's David and Chloe and Mark. God, Mark will go along with whatever David says. My younger son, Mark, was a sweet soul, but malleable, forever living in the shadow of his older brother's confidence. They've presented a united front. They'll say I'm being irrational, that I'm incapable. Then we need a united front of our own, a new voice said from the doorway. We both looked up. There, silhouetted in the kitchen doorway, was Auntie Clara. She must have come in, through the back, letting herself in, as she always did. Clara, Grace's older sister, was a woman who carried her 70 years like a suit of armor. Her hair was a sleek, silver helmet, and her gaze was as sharp and unforgiving as a surgeon's scalpel. Where Grace was fire, Clara was ice. Clara, I said, wiping hastily at my tears. I always felt a little like a student about to be graded in her presence. She came into the kitchen, her heels clicking decisively on the tile floor. She didn't sit. She stood over us, a general assessing her troops. Grace called me. She said there was an attempted eviction disguised as a birthday party. Her lips thinned. I'm not surprised. David has always been ambitious. And ambition, when it's directed at family, has another name. What's that? I asked. Greed, she said flatly. Now, stop crying, Ruth. Tears are for powerlessness, and you are not powerless. You are just outmaneuvered, for now. Her words were harsh, but they had the intended effect. The helpless feeling receded, replaced by a spark of something else. Defiance. What do I do, Clara? I asked, my voice stronger. First, you cancel the tour on Tuesday. You tell Chloe you have a prior engagement, a doctor's appointment. Be vague. It buys you time and it establishes that you are not at their beck and call. She paced slowly, her arms crossed. Second, you do not discuss this with them again. Any conversation about the Oaks, about the house, about your future, you shut down. You say, that is not up for discussion. No explanations, no justifications. You are a stone wall. And then? Grace asked, leaning forward, captivated by her sister's tactical mind. And then, Clara said, stopping and pinning me with her gaze, you go to war. But not the war they're expecting. They think this is a simple matter of pressuring a little old lady until she gives in. They are relying on your good nature, your desire for peace. So you must surprise them. You must be smarter. She pulled out the third chair and finally sat, leaning in close. The three of our heads were nearly touching over the steam of the forgotten tea. Robert was a smart man, Ruth. A meticulous man. He wouldn't have left you exposed like this. There is a will, yes, but there are always other documents, trusts, deeds, things he might have put in place to protect you. A memory long buried stirred. Robert, in his study, a few months before he got sick, the lamplight catching the silver in his hair. He'd been sorting through papers in his old oak filing cabinet. He looked up at me, his expression serious. "Ruth, you remember what we talked about, the key? If anything ever happens to me, you remember the key." At the time, I'd thought he was being morbid. I'd kissed his forehead and told him nothing was going to happen. I'd told him to come to bed. "The key," I whispered now. Clara's eyes sharpened. "What key?" "Robert," he mentioned a key. "To his filing cabinet. But he was so sick at the end. And after he was gone, I couldn't bear to go through his things. I just locked the study door, and I haven't opened it since." For the first time that night, a genuine, slow smile spread across Clara's face. It was a fearsome and beautiful thing to behold. "Well, then," she said softly, "it seems we have our first mission. Tomorrow, you are going to unlock that door." The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut. But now, nestled right beside it, was a flicker of hope. They thought I was old and useless. They thought I was just waiting to be moved off the board. But as I looked at the fierce loyalty in Grace's eyes and the cunning strategy in Clara's, I realized I had something they had completely underestimated. I had allies, and I had a key. The silence in my own house the next morning was different. It wasn't the empty, mournful silence of close widowhood I had grown accustomed to. This was a charged, waiting silence. It had a texture, a weight. It was the silence of a sealed tomb, and I was about to break the seal. I stood in the hallway outside Robert's study. This door, a simple panel of dark oak, had become a boundary in my mind. On one side was my present, a life of quiet grief and managed expectations. On the other side was my past, a place I feared would be too painful to revisit, and now, possibly, the key to my future. My hand trembled as I reached for the small, brass key I'd retrieved from the back of my jewelry box. It was tied with a faded piece of green ribbon, a relic from a long-ago birthday gift. "The key," Robert had said. "You remember the key." I inserted it into the lock. It turned with a soft, oiled clunk that echoed in the quiet hall. For a long moment, I just stood there, my forehead resting against the cool wood. I could smell him. Or maybe I was imagining it, that faint, comforting scent of old books, pipe tobacco, though he'd quit years before, and his particular brand of sandalwood soap. It was the scent of safety, of love, of a time before all of this. "He would want you to be strong, Ruth." I whispered the words to myself, but they came out in Clara's crisp, no-nonsense tone. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pushed the door open. The room was exactly as he'd left it. A film of dust motes danced in the slants of morning light, cutting through the blinds. His large, mahogany desk stood tidy, the green blotter clean, his fountain pen laid parallel to a leather-bound notebook. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined two walls, crammed with histories, biographies, and the crime novels he'd loved so much. It was a room of order and intellect. It was so profoundly him that the grief rose up in a fresh, suffocating wave. I gripped the doorframe, steadying myself. But Clara's voice was in my head again. "Stop crying, Ruth. You are not powerless." I stepped inside. My mission was the old, four-drawer oak filing cabinet in the corner. It was where he kept all our important documents, tax returns, insurance policies, the deed to the house, the mundane architecture of a shared life. I pulled open the top drawer. It moved smoothly, well-worn. The files were meticulously labeled in Robert's neat, all-caps handwriting: taxes, 2010 to 2019, home insurance, medical records. I started pulling them out, laying them carefully on his desk. The sheer volume of paper was overwhelming. How was I supposed to find anything in all this? I worked for over an hour, my initial reverence giving way to a growing sense of futility. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I found our marriage certificate. I found the boys' birth certificates, their tiny footprints smudged and faded. I found the deed to the house, confirming what I already knew. It was in both our names and now solely in mine. I was about to give up, to surrender to the despair, when my fingers brushed against the back of the bottom drawer. There was something there, behind the last hanging file. A thick, A4-sized envelope, taped to the very back of the drawer. My heart gave a little jump. I carefully peeled the tape away. The envelope was heavy, made of stiff, high-quality paper. There was no label on the front. I carried it over to Robert's desk chair, sinking into the worn leather that still held the impression of his body. With trembling fingers, I undid the metal clasp and tipped the contents onto the blotter. There were several documents. On top was a letter written in Robert's familiar hand. Just the sight of it made my throat constrict. My dearest Ruth, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are likely feeling lost and alone. For that I am so sorry. Please know, my love, that you were my entire world. Every happy memory I have, you are at the center of it. But I also know the world can be a cruel place, even and sometimes especially within families. I have seen the way David looks at this house, at our investments. He has ambition, which is not a bad thing, but he lacks patience. And Chloe, she sees life as a balance sheet. I fear they may try to streamline your life. Once I am not here to stand in their way. So, I have taken steps. I am not the cleverest man in the world, but I am clever enough to protect the woman I love. I had to stop reading, my vision blurred with tears. He knew. Even then, 2 years ago, he knew what they might try to do. He had been trying to protect me from beyond the grave. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. The main document is a revocable living trust. I've had it drawn up by my old friend, Arthur Pendleton. Do you remember him? The sharp, quiet man from the firm. He's a good man and discreet. This trust, which I have named the Haven Trust, holds the title to this house. It means the house is not, technically, part of your estate. It is owned by the trust, and you are the sole trustee and beneficiary. This makes it much, much harder for anyone to force you to sell it or to claim it for any reason. It is your haven, Ruth, forever. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The house. He had put the house in a trust. I didn't fully understand the legalities, but the meaning was clear. David couldn't just bully me into selling it. It wasn't just mine to give away. There is more, the letter continued. In the safety deposit box at First National, the key is in the small box in my top desk drawer. You will find another set of documents. There are investment accounts in your name only that David knows nothing about. They are not a fortune, but they are enough to keep you comfortable, independent, and free from any financial persuasion. My love, you are the strongest person I have ever known. You just forget it sometimes. Do not let them make you feel small. Do not let them put you in a corner. This is your life. Live it on your terms. Be fierce, my gentle Ruth. For me, all my love, forever, Robert. I sat there for a long time, the letter pressed to my chest. The dust motes continued their silent dance around me, but the room no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like an armory. And Robert had just handed me the weapons. I found the safety deposit box key right where he said it would be, in a small, inlaid wooden box on his desk. I held the cold, brass key in one hand and his letter in the other. The cold, hard knot of fear in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a steady, growing warmth. It was the warmth of love, yes, the enduring love of my husband. But it was also the heat of anger. Robert had gone to these lengths, had this foresight, because he knew the character of our own son. I looked around the study, really looked. This wasn't a shrine to the past anymore. It was a command center for my future. They had called me old and useless, but I was Ruth, the trustee. I was Ruth, the beneficiary. I was Ruth, the woman with a plan her husband had left her, and with 2 aunties who had her back. I carefully gathered the documents, placing them back into the envelope. I didn't feel like crying anymore. I felt like fighting. The First National Bank was a temple of marble and hushed voices, a place where secrets were kept in cold metal boxes. I felt a surge of irrational guilt walking in, as if I were a thief about to rob my own life. The envelope from Robert's study was tucked securely into my large handbag, pressing against my side like a shield. I approached the desk of a young man with a severe haircut and an impeccably knotted tie. "I'd like to access my safety deposit box, please," I said, my voice sounding small in the vast, echoing space. "Of course, ma'am. Number and key?" I gave him the number Robert had written in his letter and produced the small brass key. He compared it to a log, asked for my ID, and then led me through a series of secured doors that clicked shut with unnerving finality. We entered the vault, a room lined with hundreds of identical metal doors. He found my number, inserted his own master key, and then gestured for mine. I slid it into the second lock. He turned both keys in unison, pulled the long, flat box from its slot, and placed it in my hands. "You can use room 3, he said, gesturing to a small, private alcove with a table and a chair. "Take all the time you need." I carried the box, heavier than I expected, into the room and closed the door. The click of the latch was the only sound. My heart was hammering again. This was it. The final part of Robert's plan. Setting the box on the table, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, were more documents. Neat, legal-sized folders. On top was another note from Robert, shorter this time. "For your eyes only. Arthur Pendleton is the only other soul who knows. Trust him." Beneath the note were several bound statements. I opened the first one. It was for a brokerage account in my name only. The balance made me gasp aloud. It was more than comfortable. It was life-changing. There was another for a high-yield savings account and another for a portfolio of conservative bonds. Robert, the quiet, methodical accountant, had been secretly salting away money for years. He'd taken his own haven trust philosophy and applied it to our finances, creating a fortress of wealth that was completely separate from our joint accounts that David was aware of. But it was the last document that truly stole the breath from my lungs. It was a single sheet of paper, a notarized and witnessed letter, dated just a month before his diagnosis. The heading read, "Letter of Wishes and Guidance, Re. David and Mark." My hands trembled as I read. "Ruth, what follows is difficult for me to write, but necessary. I have come to believe that David's relationship with us is, and has been for some time, transactional. He sees us not as parents to love, but as assets to manage and, eventually, inherit. I have tried to reach the boy I raised in him, but the man he has become is a stranger to me. Therefore, I have made provisions in my will for Mark, who, while easily led, has a good heart. But for David, the inheritance he will receive is the legal minimum required to avoid contesting the will $1. The rest, the house through the trust, and these separate accounts, are yours, absolutely and entirely. He will be furious. He will try to challenge this. He will try to manipulate you, to make you doubt your own mind. That is why you have Arthur, and that is why you have this letter. Stay strong, my love. Your freedom is the greatest inheritance I can give you. I slumped back in the chair, the paper fluttering from my fingers onto the table. $1. Robert had left our son $1. The finality of it, the brutal, unemotional judgment, was devastating. This wasn't just about protecting me, it was a condemnation. He had seen the core of David's nature and found it wanting. A storm of emotions warred inside me. Grief for the son we had lost long before this letter was written. A fierce, protective love for Robert, who had shouldered this painful knowledge alone. And a cold, clarifying rage at David for forcing his father to make such a bleak, final calculation. I sat in that sterile little room for a long time, just breathing. The weight of the knowledge was immense. This changed everything. The battle over the Oaks was just the opening skirmish. The real war would come after I was gone, when David learned the truth. But now, I held the battlefield plans. I carefully placed all the documents back into the safety deposit box, keeping out only the letter about David and Mark. I needed to show that to Clara and Grace. I needed their counsel. When I emerged from the bank, the sunlight seemed too bright, the world too normal. People were going about their days, oblivious to the tectonic shifts that had just occurred in the life of one ordinary-looking, 65-year-old woman. I drove straight to Grace's cottage. This time, Clara was already there, waiting. They took one look at my face and knew the vault had yielded something significant. "Well?" Clara asked, not one for preamble. I didn't speak. I just laid Robert's final letter on the kitchen table. They read it in silence, Grace with her hand over her mouth, Clara with her face an impassive mask. When she finished, Clara looked up at me, her eyes gleaming with something that looked almost like respect. "Robert," she said softly. "You brilliant, ruthless man." Grace was crying, but they were tears of fury. $1? Oh, Ruth! David, he's going to explode. Clara finished for her. But that is a problem for later. For now, this is your ultimate shield, Ruth. David cannot know this exists. Not yet. Right now, he believes he is dealing with a vulnerable widow. Let him continue to believe that. Your ignorance is your advantage. So I just pretend? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. You play the part, Clara corrected. You are the grieving, slightly confused mother who is hesitant about the Oaks. You are reluctant to leave her home. You drag your feet, you are emotional, it's what they expect. And while they are patronizing you, patting your hand, thinking they just need to wear down your sentimental resistance, you are sitting on a financial and legal fortress. You let them waste their energy on a battle you've already won. A strange feeling began to bloom in my chest. It wasn't quite happiness, and it wasn't quite anger. It was power. A quiet, ferocious power. For the first time since my birthday, I felt a smile touch my lips, a real one. It was small and sharp. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "Okay, then let the performance begin." The performance began, as I knew it would, with a phone call. "Mom, it's Chloe. I'm just confirming our time for tomorrow. 10 o'clock? I've booked a private lunch with the activities director at the Oaks. She's lovely." I took a deep, silent breath, channeling the persona Clara had crafted for me, the hesitant, sentimental widow. "Oh, Chloe, dear, thank you for arranging all that. But I'm afraid I can't make it tomorrow." A beat of surprised silence. "You can't? Why not?" "I have a prior commitment." I made my voice sound a little vague, a little frail. "An appointment I simply can't miss." "What kind of appointment?" The sweetness in her voice was now layered with a fine grit of impatience. "Just an appointment," I repeated, layering a subtle tremor into my words. With my doctor. You know how it is at my age. Lots of little checkups. It was a masterstroke, using their own weapon of age against them. How could they argue with a doctor's appointment? Oh, Chloe said, momentarily thrown. Is everything all right? I'm sure it's nothing, dear. Just routine. We'll have to reschedule the tour. I didn't say I'll get back to you. I left it hanging, an unresolved loose end I knew would irritate David's orderly mind. I see. Well, I'll let David know. The line went dead. I held the phone, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was a small victory, a mere delay, but it was mine. I had asserted a sliver of control. The counterattack was not long in coming. 2 days later, David himself appeared on my doorstep. It was a Saturday morning. I was in the garden, actually not gardening, just sipping tea and looking at the overgrown patch that Robert had loved. It was wild, yes, but beautiful, full of life. Mom, he said, his voice a careful blend of concern and authority. He didn't bother with a hello. Chloe tells me you canceled the tour, and that you have a doctor's appointment? What's going on? Are you unwell? I looked up at him, squinting in the sunlight. I wore my oldest, most faded gardening clothes. I looked the part of the dotty old woman puttering in her yard. I'm fine, David. Just a checkup. Dr. Evans said it's important for women my age to stay on top of things. I deliberately used the phrase women my age, watching his face. He flinched, just slightly. Well, that's good, he said, recovering. But we need to get this tour rescheduled. The spot at the Oaks is highly sought after. We can't afford to lose it. Lose it? I said, allowing a note of gentle confusion. It's a retirement community, David, not a concert ticket. I'm sure there will be other spots. You don't understand the market, Mom, he said, a familiar condescension creeping into his tone. He stepped onto the patio, his polished loafers looking alien on the weathered stone. These premium places have waiting lists a mile long. This isn't something we can just put off. He gestured around the garden. And look at this place. It's a hazard. You could trip and fall out here, and no one would know for days. The manipulation was so blatant it was almost impressive. Fear, he was trying to scare me. I've been walking this garden for 40 years, David. I know every stone. I took a slow sip of my tea, and I'm not ready to leave it. His patience, always a thin veneer, began to crack. It's not about what you're ready for, Mom. It's about what's sensible. It's about what's safe. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a faux confidential tone. Mark and I, we worry about you. We lie awake at night. This is for us, as much as for you. We need the peace of mind of knowing you're being cared for. And there it was, the emotional blackmail. Making my resistance not just about stubbornness, but about a lack of consideration for my own children's feelings. It was a brilliant, cruel tactic. The old Ruth would have crumbled under the weight of that guilt. The new Ruth simply looked at him, her head tilted. It's kind of you to worry, David, but I am being cared for. I care for myself, and I have Grace and Clara. They check on me. He waved a dismissive hand. They're not family. This is a family decision. The words hung in the air, cold and absolute. A family decision. But I was no longer being treated as part of the family. I was the problem the family had to solve. I need to think about it, David, I said, using my fallback position. It's a very big decision. Leaving my home, it's a lot. I made my eyes look a little watery, a little lost. Your father, he's in every room. I'm just not ready to say goodbye. It was a low blow, using Robert, but I was playing to win. I saw the flash of frustration in his eyes, quickly masked by a sigh of strained understanding. Okay, Mom. Okay, think about it, but please don't think too long. He kissed my cheek, a dry, perfunctory gesture. We're only thinking of you. He left, and I watched his car disappear down the street. The encounter had left me shaking, but not with fear. With adrenaline. I had held the line. I had parried every thrust. I had weaponized my supposed weakness. I went inside and called Grace. He was here, I said. And, she demanded. And I was a trembling, hesitant, grieving mess who absolutely refused to commit to anything. Grace's laughter was a rich, joyful sound on the other end of the line. "Oh, Ruth, you magnificent thing. You're a natural." "It feels dirty," I confessed. "Lying to my own son." "It's not lying." Clara's voice cut in. She was clearly on the speakerphone. "It's strategy. You are showing him the version of you he expects to see. You are letting him underestimate you. Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake." The phrase sent a chill down my spine. My son was my enemy. The truth of it was undeniable now. "What's the next move?" I asked. "The next move," Clara said, "is to let him make one. He's not going to accept a stalemate. He'll escalate. He'll bring in reinforcements. My guess? He'll try to get Mark to talk to you. The good cop to David's bad cop. Be ready for it." I hung up, the adrenaline slowly fading, leaving a residue of profound sadness. This was my life now. A cold war with my children, fought with whispers, strategies, and lies of omission. I looked around the home I was fighting for, at the photographs of my smiling boys on the mantelpiece. The faces in those pictures were ghosts. The men they had become were strangers. And I was learning to be a stranger to them, too. A stranger with a secret arsenal and a will of iron. Clara's prediction was eerily accurate. The reinforcement arrived not with a knock, but with a soft, hesitant tap 3 days later. It was Mark. My younger son stood on the porch, holding a bakery box tied with string. His smile was warm, but his eyes held a nervous, apologetic energy I knew all too well. He was here on a mission, and he hated it. "Mom," he said, enveloping me in a hug that felt genuine. He still smelled of the same citrusy cologne he'd worn since college. "I brought you those almond croissants you like." "Oh, Mark, thank you, dear." I ushered him in, playing my part. The slightly overwhelmed, grateful mother. What a lovely surprise. We settled in the kitchen, the familiar ritual of making coffee giving us both something to do. I could feel him gathering his thoughts, rehearsing his lines. "So," he began, stirring sugar into his mug, not meeting my eyes. I talked to David." "Oh?" I said, keeping my tone light and neutral. He's really worried about you, Mom." Mark's words came out in a rush. "We both are. This house, it's just so much for one person. And David says the upkeep is a fortune. He showed me the bills for the new roof last year. It's a lot." I sipped my coffee. So, the new tactic was financial. They were going to try to convince me I couldn't afford my own home. "The house is paid for, Mark, and your father and I were always careful. We have savings." I deliberately used the past tense, implying a finite pool of resources that was dwindling. I know, Mark said, looking pained. "But savings don't last forever, and at the Oaks, everything is included. It's financially prudent," David says. "You could lock in your cost of living, no more surprise repair bills. It's smarter." He was parroting David's words, but they sounded hollow in his mouth. Mark had never been interested in financial prudence. He was an artist, a dreamer. This was David's script. "It sounds very sensible when you put it like that," I said, laying on the vulnerability. "But Mark, honey, this is my home. All my memories of your father are here, of you boys growing up. The thought of packing it all up, it just breaks my heart." I let my voice quaver on the last word. It worked. His face softened immediately. "Oh, Mom, I know. I know it's hard." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "But think of it less as leaving memories behind and more as taking them with you. We'll help you pack all the important things. The photos, Dad's favorite chair. You can make a new space, a easier space, filled with all the things you love." It was a good line, well delivered. I could see how this would work on the old Ruth. "I suppose," I said, looking down at my hands, playing for time. "It's just so final. It feels like I'm admitting that my life is over." "No," he said, a little too forcefully. "It's not that at all. It's a new chapter. A chapter where you can relax, read, make new friends. You wouldn't have to worry about the lawn or the gutters or anything." He leaned forward, his eyes earnest. "And it would mean so much to me, Mom, to know you're safe. I worry about you all alone out here." There it was again, the guilt. But this time, coming from Mark, it stung differently. David's concern was a weapon. Mark's felt, at least partially, real. He was a follower, not a mastermind. He'd been convinced this was the right thing, the loving thing. I looked at my son, his kind, open face creased with genuine anxiety. A part of me wanted to tell him everything, to show him the trust, the bank statements, Robert's devastating letter, to say, "Look, we don't have to do this. I am safe. I am provided for." But Clara's warning was a drumbeat in my mind. Trust no one. The good cop is still a cop. If I told Mark, his loyalty would be torn, and David would sniff out that weakness in an instant. Mark would crack under pressure. He always did. So I had to break my own heart a little. I had to lie to the son who was, in his own misguided way, trying to love me. "You're such a good boy, Mark," I said, my voice thick with manufactured emotion. "You always have been. You and your brother, you just want what's best for me." "I know that." He beamed, relieved, thinking he was making progress. Let me just have a little more time," I pleaded. "Let me get used to the idea. It's all so sudden." "Can you give me that? A few more weeks?" The request was reasonable, and from his perspective, I was capitulating, just on a slower timeline. He'd be able to report back to David that he'd softened me up, that I was coming around. "Of course, Mom," he said, squeezing my hand again. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He stayed for another hour, chatting about his latest painting, about a girl he was seeing. It was lovely. It was normal. It was a beautiful, painful lie. When he left, I watched him go, my heart aching. I had manipulated my gentle son, and he had left thinking he had done a good thing. I called the aunties. "Mark came," I said, the fatigue evident in my voice. "And?" Grace asked. I played my part. I was vulnerable. I appealed to his heart. I asked for more time, and he gave it to me. "Good," Clara said, her approval a rare commodity. "You bought us a few weeks. David will see it as a delay, not a defeat. He'll think you're wearing down. It will make him overconfident." It felt awful, I confessed. "Mark, he believes he's helping." "The road to hell is paved with good intentions, Ruth," Clara replied, not unkindly. "And David is the one holding the map. Remember who the real enemy is." But that was the problem. The lines were blurring. The enemy lived in the face of my son. The enemy was being aided by my other son. And I was lying to them both. I hung up the phone and looked around the silent house. It felt less like a haven and more like a fortress under siege. And I was the lone soldier on the walls, pretending the gate was already broken. The weeks of my requested grace period passed with an eerie quiet. No calls from David, no visits from Mark. It was the calm before the storm, and I could feel the pressure building in the air, thick and heavy. Clara had me use the time to meet with Arthur Pendleton, Robert's old friend and the architect of the Haven Trust. His office was in an old, brick building in the city center, a place that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Arthur was a man in his late 70s, with a kind, wrinkled face and eyes that held a deep, perceptive intelligence. "Ruth," he said, rising to take both my hands. "It's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Robert was a dear friend. I was sorry to lose him." "Thank you, Arthur. I miss him every day." We sat, and I slid the envelope from the study across his massive oak desk. He opened it, his expression growing grave as he read Robert's letter to me. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes full of a sad understanding. "He was a man of great foresight," Arthur said softly, "and great compassion. He wanted to spare you this." He tapped the letter. He saw the trajectory. "David and Chloe. They're pushing for the Oaks," I explained. "They presented it as a done deal at my birthday." Arthur nodded slowly. "I'm not surprised. The pressure to downsize aging parents is a common tactic. It frees up the asset of the family home for the next generation. But with the house in the trust, it's not your asset to free up. They can't force a sale. The trust owns it. You merely reside in it as the beneficiary." Hearing the legal confirmation was a profound relief. "So I'm safe? The house is safe?" "From a forced sale, absolutely," Arthur said. "But Ruth, be prepared. When people like David and I say this with all respect for your son, but I have seen his type when people like him don't get their way through persuasion, they often escalate to more aggressive tactics." "What kind of tactics?" "They may try to question your competency," he said, his voice gentle but direct. "They might suggest you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs. They could petition the court to have you declared incapacitated and to have themselves appointed as your conservator. It's a legal maneuver that would give them complete control over your finances and your life." The blood drained from my face. "They could do that? My own children?" "It's unfortunately common in inheritance disputes," Arthur said. "They would need medical testimony, of course. But a doctor who is a friend of the family, or who is simply presented with a one-sided story about an elderly, confused woman refusing sensible care, it's a possibility you must be prepared for." The war was escalating far beyond what I had imagined. This wasn't just about a retirement community anymore. This was about my very freedom, my right to make my own choices. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "We get ahead of it," Arthur said, his demeanor shifting from consoling to fiercely protective. "First, you will sign a durable power of attorney, naming me as your agent. This means if you are ever incapacitated, the power goes to me, not to David. Second, we have you see an independent geriatric specialist for a full cognitive assessment. We get a clean bill of health on the record, now, before they can plant any seeds of doubt. We build a paper fortress around your competence." It felt so clinical, so defensive. I was having to legally arm myself against my own flesh and blood. "Arthur, Robert's letter, about David's inheritance." Arthur's face became a mask of professional neutrality. "A no-contest clause, leaving him $1 is legally sound, but it is a nuclear option. It will almost certainly trigger a lawsuit. He will claim undue influence. That Robert wasn't of sound mind. It will be ugly, long, and expensive. My advice? Keep that document secret for as long as humanly possible. Let the battle be about the Oaks for now. It's a smaller, more defensible front. I left Arthur's office with a folder full of documents and a head spinning with legal jargon and grim possibilities. The meeting had been necessary, but it had made the abstract threat terrifyingly concrete. When I got home, the storm I had been feeling finally broke. David's car was in the driveway, and he wasn't alone. Sitting in my living room, next to David on the sofa, was a man I'd never seen before. He was in his 40s, dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking suit. He had the polished, predatory calm of a bird of prey. "Mom," David said, standing up. He didn't smile. "This is Ethan Croft. He's an attorney who specializes in elder law." My heart stopped. Arthur's warning echoed in my ears. They often escalate. Ethan Croft stood and offered a hand. His grip was firm, dry. "Mrs. Gable, a pleasure. David has been telling me all about you." I felt a cold fury begin to simmer beneath my skin. He had brought a lawyer into my home. My own son had brought a legal vulture to swoop down on me. "Has he?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. I did not take a seat. I remained standing, forcing them to look up at me. "And what exactly has he been telling you?" David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, let's not be dramatic. Ethan is here to help. We're all on the same side. Are we?" I asked, looking directly at Ethan Croft. "What side is that exactly?" The lawyer gave a practiced, soothing smile. "The side of your well-being, Mrs. Gable. David is concerned that you may be making decisions, or rather, refusing to make decisions that aren't in your best long-term interest. He's worried about your capacity to live independently." There it was. The first shot across the bow. The word capacity. "My capacity is just fine, thank you," I said, my gaze locked on David. "I have been living independently for 65 years, and managing quite well for the last 2 without your father." "The world is different now, Mom," David said, his voice hardening. "And you're not getting any younger. This stubbornness, this emotional attachment to a house, it's not rational. We need to make rational decisions for you." "We?" I repeated, the ice in my voice unmistakable. "There is no we, David. This is my life. This is my home. And I am telling you, I am not moving to the Oaks." The room went silent. The lines were drawn, bare and stark. Ethan Croft cleared his throat. "Mrs. Gable, perhaps we could discuss a compromise? A trial period at the Oaks? Sometimes resistance is just a fear of the unknown." I turned my gaze to him, and I let all the pain, the betrayal, the fury of the last few months show in my eyes. "Mr. Croft," I said, my voice low and clear, "you are a guest in my home, an uninvited one. This is not a negotiation. There will be no trial period. There will be no compromise. The discussion is over." I walked to the front door and opened it wide. "Now, I would like you to leave." David stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and rage. He hadn't expected this. He had expected the trembling, hesitant mother. He had not expected the woman with a spine of steel, forged in the fire of his betrayal. "Mom, you're being unreasonable," he sputtered. "Goodbye, David," I said, my eyes never leaving his. He stood, his jaw clenched, and strode out, the lawyer following close behind. As Ethan Croft passed me, he paused. "This doesn't have to be difficult, Mrs. Gable," he said softly. "Oh, I think it does," I replied, and I closed the door behind them. I stood there, my back against the door, my whole body trembling. It was no longer a cold war, the battle was joined. And I had just won the first, open confrontation. The victory of throwing David and his lawyer out of my house was short-lived. It was a symbolic triumph, a declaration of independence, but I knew it would come with a cost. David's pride had been wounded, and a man like David, when wounded, does not retreat. He seeks a more devastating weapon. The new attack began subtly, insidiously. It started with a phone call from my longtime neighbor Margaret. "Ruth, dear," she'd said, her voice laced with a concern that felt sticky. "I saw David the other day. He looked so worried. He said you haven't been yourself lately. That you're refusing to see reason about that big old house. He's just concerned for your safety, you know." I forced a light laugh. "Oh, Margaret, you know how sons can be. They think we turn into children again the moment we get a gray hair. I'm perfectly fine." But the seed had been planted. David was poisoning the well, telling our friends, our neighbors, anyone who would listen, that I was becoming irrational, unstable, a danger to myself. A few days later, I ran into Dr. Evans, my GP, at the grocery store. "Ruth," he said, his usual jovial tone a bit strained. "I had a chat with your son David recently. He's quite passionate about your well-being." My blood ran cold. "Is that so?" "He just wanted to make sure I was keeping a close eye on you," Dr. Evans said, not quite meeting my gaze. "Mentioned you seemed confused sometimes, forgetting things. It's nothing to be ashamed of, Ruth. It's a conversation I have with many families." The bastard. He was preemptively manipulating my own doctor, laying the groundwork for a competency challenge. I felt a hot flush of shame and anger. He was trying to make me doubt myself, to make the world see me as a feeble-minded old woman. "I can assure you, Michael," I said, using his first name to re-establish our long-standing relationship. "My memory is as sharp as it ever was. Sharper, in fact, when it comes to the things that matter." I held his gaze until he looked away, flustered. "Of course, Ruth, of course. I didn't mean to imply." But the damage was done. The whisper campaign was in full effect. I started to feel paranoid, seeing pitying or wary looks where before there had been none. I was being isolated, painted as the crazy old lady who was too stubborn to see what was best for her. The most painful blow came from Mark. He called, his voice thick with confusion and hurt. "Mom, David says you threw him out of the house? That you were hysterical?" Hysterical. The word was a slap, the classic dismissal of a woman's justified anger. "I was not hysterical, Mark," I said, my voice tight. I was firm. "He brought a lawyer into my home without my permission to discuss putting me away. How would you feel?" "He's just trying to help, Mom. He's under a lot of pressure." "We all are. Why are you making this so hard?" The frustration in his voice was genuine. David had successfully turned my resistance into a personal attack on the family. "I am not making anything hard, Mark. I am simply living my life, in my home. David says you're not thinking clearly. He says you're isolated, that you only listen to Grace and Clara now, and that they're filling your head with nonsense." So now my friends were the villains. The meddling old spinsters turning me against my own children. The narrative was complete and tragically effective. I felt the walls closing in. This wasn't a legal battle yet, it was a social one. And in the court of public opinion, a son's concern often trumps a mother's stubbornness. I was losing my standing in my own community, my own story being rewritten by my son. I poured my heart out to Grace and Clara that evening in Grace's garden, the only place that felt safe. "He's smearing you," Clara said, her face grim. "It's a classic tactic. Undermine your credibility so that when he makes his big move, no one will question it." "What can I do?" I asked, feeling the weight of the isolation. "I can't go around to every neighbor and every friend and proclaim that I'm of sound mind." "No, you can't," Clara agreed. "But you can live your life. You can be seen. You can be the picture of competence. Go to the library, Attend the garden club. Be Ruth. Do not hide. Hiding is what he wants. It confirms his story. And, Grace added, her eyes sparkling with a new idea, we can fight fire with fire. What do you mean? I asked. David is telling his story. We need to tell ours. Not loudly, not aggressively. Subtly, we need our own whisper campaign. I was horrified. I won't sink to his level. It's not sinking, Clara interjected, seeing the merit in Grace's plan. It's counterintelligence. When Margaret calls with her concern, you don't get defensive. You sound sad. You say, "It's so hard, Margaret. David is so focused on the value of the house, he doesn't seem to care that it's my home. I just don't know what's gotten into him." You shift the narrative. You make it about his greed, not your competence. It was brilliant, and it was ruthless. So, I began. The next time Margaret called, I did just that. I let my voice sound weary and heartbroken. I just don't understand it, Margaret. Robert and I worked so hard for this home. It breaks my heart that David sees it as just a piggy bank to be broken open. He's even brought a lawyer into it. It feels like he's trying to evict his own mother. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, a lawyer? Oh, Ruth, that's awful. The tide began to turn slowly. The story of a greedy son is just as compelling, if not more so, than the story of a confused mother. People started to look at David differently. The narrative of concern started to crack, revealing the avarice beneath. I was learning that in this kind of war, the truth was not a shield. It was a weapon that had to be wielded with precision. David had poisoned the well, so I was teaching people to drink from a different source. It was ugly. It was exhausting. But it was working. I was no longer just defending. I was counterattacking. In the midst of the social Cold War, an unexpected source of intelligence emerged, my daughter-in-law, Chloe. Or rather, the cracks in her perfectly polished facade. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was strained, stripped of its usual saccharine coating. "Ruth? It's Chloe. I was wondering if I could stop by. Alone." I was immediately on guard. What for Chloe? A long pause. I need to talk. Woman to woman. Curiosity got the better of me. I agreed. When she arrived, she looked different. The crisp, designer blouse was slightly wrinkled, and her makeup couldn't quite conceal the shadows under her eyes. She declined tea, twisting her hands in her lap. "This is awkward," she began, not meeting my eyes. "And David would kill me if he knew I was here." "Then why are you here?" I asked, my tone neutral. She took a deep breath. "This fight, it's getting out of hand. The lawyers, the talking to neighbors, it's a mess. And it's expensive." Ah, there it was. The bottom line. Ethan Croft doesn't work for free. She continued, a note of bitterness creeping into her voice. And David is so obsessed. He's not sleeping. He's spending all his time on this, on building a case against you, and it's costing us a fortune in legal fees with no guarantee of a return. I remained silent, letting her talk. This was a revelation. David's campaign was putting a strain on his own marriage, on his finances. He was overplaying his hand. "He's talking about petitioning the court for guardianship," she whispered, her face pale. "Did you know that? He's having me keep a log of every time I see you, every conversation, looking for signs of decline. It's sick." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. So it had come to this. He was literally building a dossier on his own mother. "Why are you telling me this, Chloe?" I asked, my voice soft. "You've been his partner in this from the beginning." She looked up, and for the first time, I saw genuine emotion in her eyes, fear. Because I'm scared, Ruth. I'm scared of what this is doing to our family, to our finances, and I'm starting to be scared of him. This isn't the man I married. This is a stranger. He's so angry all the time. She was the canary in the coal mine. David's relentless pursuit was beginning to consume him, and the fallout was reaching his own doorstep. "What do you want from me, Chloe?" I asked. "I want you to give in," she said, a desperate plea in her voice. Just agree to the Oaks. Sell the house. Let him have his win. It would stop all this. We could go back to normal." I looked at her, this woman who had seen me as an obstacle, and I felt a pang of something that was not quite pity, but a profound understanding of her weakness. She wasn't an evil mastermind. She was a follower who had followed her husband right off a cliff and was now realizing how far the fall was. "Chloe," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "This is my home. This is my life. I will not be bullied out of it, not by David, and not by his legal bills. If you are afraid of him, that is a problem for your marriage, not a reason for me to surrender." Her face fell. She had come for a truce, but on her terms. On David's terms. "He won't stop, Ruth," she said, standing up, her composure cracking. "You don't understand. He's not going to stop. He'll ruin you. He'll ruin himself. He'll ruin all of us. Then he will have to live with the consequences," I said, standing as well. "And so will you." She left, a defeated, frantic energy in her wake. I stood in my quiet living room, my mind racing. This was valuable information. David was financially and emotionally stretched. He was becoming desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. I called Clara immediately. "Chloe just left. She's panicking. David is spending a fortune on legal fees and is preparing a guardianship petition." I could almost hear Clara's smile through the phone. "Excellent." "Excellent?" "Clara, he's trying to have me declared incompetent." "He's trying," she emphasized. "But he's also showing his hand, and he's vulnerable. The fact that his wife came to you, begging, that's a sign of profound weakness. He's overextended. This is our moment. Our moment for what? To go on the offensive. It's time to see Dr. Evans for that cognitive assessment. We get the result, a clean bill of mental health, and we hand it to Arthur Pendleton. The moment David files his petition, we hit him with a preemptive strike, motion to dismiss, backed by a sworn affidavit from a doctor stating you are perfectly competent. We make him look like a fool. Worse, we make him look like a predatory son trying to steal from his mother. The strategy was breathtaking in its audacity. We wouldn't wait for the axe to fall. We would break the handle over our knee first. "I'll call Dr. Evans first thing in the morning," I said, a new sense of purpose filling me. Chloe, in her desperation, had inadvertently given me the key to David's undoing. She had shown me his weakest point, his own crumbling foundation. The unlikely ally had been motivated by self-interest, but the intelligence she provided was a gift. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Sitting in Dr. Evans's waiting room felt different this time. The familiar, faded posters about flu shots and healthy eating seemed to hold a hidden menace. This wasn't a routine checkup. It was an examination, a test I had to pass, not for my health, but for my freedom. "Doctor." Evans called me in, his manner professional, but I could see the wariness in his eyes. He'd been primed by David. I had to deprogram him. "Ruth," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "What can I do for you today?" "I'd like a comprehensive cognitive assessment, Michael," I said, my voice clear and direct. He blinked, caught off guard. "Ah, cognitive assessment. What for?" "Because my son, David, has been telling people, including you, that I am confused and forgetful. He is preparing to petition the court for guardianship over me. I want a baseline on the record, from my doctor of 20 years, stating that I am, in fact, of sound mind. I watched the words land. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ruth, that's a very serious allegation. It is, I agreed. And it's true. He brought a lawyer, Ethan Croft, to my home to discuss it. I threw them both out. Now, I am here, of my own volition, asking you to test me. I have nothing to hide. I was taking control of the narrative, right here, in his office. I was not a passive patient. I was an active participant in my own defense. He was quiet for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. All right, if that's what you want. The assessment began. It was grueling. He started with simple questions: the date, the season, the current prime minister. Then came memory tests. He read a list of 10 words and asked me to repeat them now and then again later. He had me count backwards from 100 by sevens. He gave me complex commands to follow. Take this piece of paper in your left hand, fold it in half, and place it on the floor. I focused, my mind a sharp, clear lens. I remembered all 10 words. I counted backwards without a hitch. I followed the commands precisely. I was Ruth, the former school teacher, the woman who had managed a household, a budget, a family. I was in my element. Then came the more subtle tests. He showed me a picture and asked me to tell a story about it. He asked me to interpret proverbs. What does it mean when people say, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones? I looked him dead in the eye. It means that you shouldn't criticize others for faults you have yourself, Michael. Or, in a more contemporary context, it might mean that if you're vulnerable to attack, you shouldn't be the one launching them. I saw a flicker of understanding in his gaze. He was beginning to see the subtext of this entire situation. The assessment took over an hour. When it was finished, he sat back, removing his glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. Well, Ruth, he said, a new respect in his voice. That was one of the most robust performances on a cognitive assessment I have ever seen. Your recall, your executive function, your abstract reasoning, they are all well within the normal range for a woman half your age. There is absolutely no clinical evidence of cognitive decline. The relief was so profound it felt like a physical wave, washing away weeks of tension and doubt. I hadn't realized how much David's poison had seeped into my own psyche, how I had started to secretly wonder if I was losing my grip. Thank you, Michael, I said, my voice thick with emotion. No, he said, looking genuinely chastened. Thank you for coming in, for showing me the truth. I should not have let David's concerns influence me. It was unprofessional. He began typing on his computer. I am writing a full report. I will state unequivocally that you are fully capable of managing your own personal, financial, and medical affairs. I will have it for you by the end of the day. I walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. I had the weapon Clara had told me to get. I had the official medical proof of my own competence. I went straight to Arthur Pendleton's office and handed him the report. He read it, a grim smile on his face. Perfect, he said. This is our shield. Now, we wait. The moment we get wind of a filing, we unleash this. We will also file for a protective order against harassment. We will paint David as the aggressor he is. I left his office, the sun warm on my face. I had faced the crucible and emerged stronger. David had tried to define me as feeble-minded, and I had handed him a doctor's note proving him wrong. The balance of power had shifted. I was no longer just defending. I was armed and dangerous. The formal attack came not with a phone call, but with a registered letter. It was thick, legal-sized, and bore the return address of Ethan Croft's firm. My hands were steady as I opened it. This was what we had been waiting for. It was a petition for appointment of guardian, filed in the county court. David was asking the state to declare me an incapacitated person and to appoint him as my guardian, giving him total control over my finances and my person. The supporting documents were a masterpiece of manipulation affidavits from David and, to my horror, from Mark, stating that I was forgetful, irrational, susceptible to undue influence from non-family members, and that I was making dangerous decisions by refusing to leave my home. Seeing Mark's signature was a physical pain. David had gotten to him. He had convinced my softer son that this was a necessary, loving intervention, but we were ready. Within 24 hours of the petition being served, Arthur Pendleton filed our response. It was a legal thunderclap. He filed a motion to dismiss the petition as frivolous and filed in bad faith. Attached was the sworn affidavit from Dr. Evans, stating I was in perfect cognitive health. He also filed my own affidavit, detailing the history of David's pressure campaign, the incident with the lawyer, the financial motivations, and Chloe's visit. And finally, he filed the durable power of attorney I had signed, naming Arthur as my agent, effectively cutting David out of any decision-making, even if I were to become incapacitated in the future. The ambush David had planned had been turned into a counter-ambush. The first hearing was set for a week later. I dressed with care, a simple, elegant navy blue dress, pearls, my hair styled. I looked like what I was, a dignified, competent woman. Clara and Grace came with me, my personal guard of honor. The courtroom was a cold, imposing place. David was there with Ethan Croft. He looked pale and tense, shocked by the ferocity and speed of our response. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Mark was not with him. I felt a small pang of relief at that. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Wilkins, peered over her glasses at the paperwork. "Mr. Croft," she began, her voice dry as dust, "you have filed a petition for guardianship for Ruth Gable. You claim she is incapacitated." "Yes, Your Honor," Croft said, rising. Her son, David, is deeply concerned about her ability to live safely alone and manage her complex finances. She is refusing necessary medical care. Medical care? Judge Wilkins interrupted, holding up Dr. Evans's affidavit. "This report from her primary care physician, conducted just last week, says she is in excellent health, both physically and cognitively. It says, and I quote, 'There is no basis whatsoever for a finding of incapacity.' Can you explain this discrepancy?" Ethan Croft floundered. "Your Honor, the family's observations over a longer period are trumped by a clinical assessment," the judge finished for him. "And I have here a power of attorney, duly executed, naming Arthur Pendleton as her agent. So even if there were a future issue, which the doctor says is highly unlikely, you are not the designated agent, Mr. Gable." She looked at David, her gaze piercing. "This petition seems to be based on a disagreement with your mother's lifestyle choices, not on any evidence of incapacity. The law does not allow me to appoint a guardian because a son doesn't like his mother's friends or doesn't want her to live in her own home." She turned her attention to Arthur. "Mr. Pendleton, you have also filed for a protective order." "We have, Your Honor," Arthur said, standing calmly. "The harassment from Mr. claimed Gable has been relentless and is causing my client significant emotional distress. We are asking the court to order him to cease and desist all contact regarding her personal and financial decisions." The judge looked back at David and his lawyer, her expression one of profound disapproval. "Mr. Croft, I am dismissing this petition with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled without significant new medical evidence. Furthermore, I am inclined to grant the protective order. This appears to be a predatory use of the guardianship system. The court is not a tool for children to bully their parents. She banged her gavel. Petition dismissed. Protective order granted. Mr. Gable, you are to have no further contact with your mother regarding her residence, her finances, or her personal affairs. Is that clear? David looked like he'd been slapped. He nodded, mute with humiliation. It was over. In less than 15 minutes, his entire campaign had been obliterated. He had overreached, and the system, for once, had protected the vulnerable. As we walked out of the courtroom, David hurried past us, his face a mask of fury and shame. He didn't look at me. I stood on the courthouse steps, the sun warming my face. I had won, not just a battle, but the war for my own mind, my own life. The legal threat was neutralized. But as I watched my sons retreating back, I felt no joy, only a deep, abiding sadness. The chasm between us was now official, legal, and permanent. I had saved my freedom, but I had lost my son. The cost of victory was a hollow space in my heart where a mother's love for her child used to be. The silence after the court victory was the loudest I have ever experienced. The phone didn't ring. No one came to the door. The relentless pressure was gone, but it had been replaced by a void. I had spent months in a state of high alert, my every thought and action dedicated to this fight. Now that it was over, I felt untethered. I wandered through the house, my fortress that was now secure. I ran my hand over the banister Robert had polished so many times, looked at the photographs of my boys. The victory felt Pyrrhic. I had proven my competence to a judge, but I had lost my family in the process. David was gone, a ghost of resentment, and Mark was lost to me, trapped in the gravitational pull of his brother's anger. Grace and Clara tried to buoy my spirits. "You should be celebrating, Ruth," Grace said, pouring us a glass of sherry, a rare indulgence. "You were magnificent. You looked that judge in the eye and you won." "She's right," Clara added. "You faced down a significant threat and you emerged victorious. You should feel proud." "I feel empty," I confessed, the sherry tasting like ash in my mouth. "I feel like I've performed a surgery to cut out a cancer, and now I'm left with this gaping wound. He's my son, and I have a court order keeping him away from me." "He did that to himself, Ruth," Clara said, not unkindly. "You did not take a son from yourself. He chose to stop being one." The logic was sound, but the heart is not a logical organ. The grief was a physical weight on my chest. I had wanted to protect my home, my independence. I hadn't wanted to destroy my family. A week after the hearing, a letter arrived. It was from Mark. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Mom, I don't even know what to say." "What happened in that courtroom?" "David is devastated. He says you humiliated him. He says you chose your friends and your house over your own family. I don't know what to believe anymore. David says one thing, and you do another. He says he was only ever trying to help, and you used a legal loophole to make him look like a monster. I can't be in the middle of this. It's tearing me apart. I love you, Mom, but I can't go against David. He's my brother. He's all I have left now. I think it's best if we don't talk for a while. I need some space to figure things out. I'm sorry." Mark, the paper fell from my hands. It was a goodbye. A gentle, heartbreaking goodbye, but a goodbye nonetheless. He had chosen his side. The good cop had left the force. I crumpled onto the bottom step of the staircase, the very spot where I had kissed scraped knees and helped with homework, and I wept. I wept for the loss of my sons. I wept for the family picnics that would never happen, for the Christmas dinners that would now be silent affairs. I wept for Robert and the future he had wanted for us, a future of growing old together surrounded by grandchildren, not court orders. The Victory had come at the cost of my legacy. I had no one to leave the house to now. No one to inherit the silver, the photographs, the stories. The Haven Trust would protect an empty shell. For days, I moved through the house like a ghost. I had won the war, but I felt like I had lost everything that made the war worth fighting. The house was safe, but it was no longer a home. It was a museum of a life that was over. It was Grace who finally pulled me out of the despair. She didn't offer platitudes, she simply showed up with a suitcase. "Get packed," she said. "We're going away." "Where?" I asked, listless. "It doesn't matter. Anywhere that isn't here. You need to remember that there is a world outside these four walls, a world that doesn't include lawsuits and betrayals. You need to remember who you are without all of this." Clara, surprisingly, endorsed the plan. A strategic retreat is sometimes necessary to regroup. Go. Breathe. Grieve. Then come back and decide what Ruth wants to do with the rest of her life. So I packed a bag. I locked the door to my empty, silent fortress, and I got in the car with Grace. We drove south, towards the coast, with no destination in mind. As the city faded behind us, I felt the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen, just a little. The victory had cost me my sons. But as I watched the fields roll by, I realized the fight had given me something else, too. It had given me back myself. Ruth, the fighter. Ruth, the survivor. And now, it was time to figure out who that woman was and what she wanted to do with her hard-won freedom. The sea air was a shock to the system, a cold, clean slap after the stale, recirculated atmosphere of my own grief. We found a small, weather-beaten cottage for rent in a village where no one knew our names. The days were governed by the tides, not by court dates or anxious phone calls. For the first few days, I did nothing. I sat on the pebble beach and watched the relentless crash and pull of the waves. There is a profound wisdom in the ocean. It doesn't care about your pain, your lawsuits, your broken family. It just is. Its constancy is a comfort. However bad things are, the tide will still go out, and it will still come in. Grace let me be quiet. She would bring me a cup of tea, sit beside me for a while, and then wander off to hunt for sea glass. She understood that I needed to be alone with the vastness, to let my own small, tortured world be put into perspective. Slowly, the numbness began to recede, and feeling returned. It wasn't all pain. There was the simple pleasure of a warm scone with clotted cream at a seaside cafe. The startling beauty of a sunset painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The sound of gulls wheeling overhead. I had been so focused on the battle for my home that I had forgotten the world was full of other beautiful things. One afternoon, as we were walking along the coastal path, Grace said, "He would be so proud of you, you know." Robert. I felt a fresh pang, but this one was sweeter, laced with love rather than loss. Would he? I drove his sons away. "You defended the life he built for you," she corrected gently. "He gave you the tools, but you were the one who had the courage to use them. He knew David's nature, Ruth. He prepared for this. He wouldn't be disappointed that his plan worked. He'd be thrilled that you were strong enough to see it through." Her words were a balm. She was right. Robert hadn't left me those documents, hoping I would surrender them to keep the peace. He had left them knowing I would need them to fight. I started to sleep through the night again. The dreams of courtrooms and David's angry face began to be replaced by dreams of the ocean, of wide, open spaces. I started to sketch again, something I hadn't done since I was a young woman. I filled a small notebook with shaky drawings of boats and cliffs and seabirds. I was, slowly, regenerating. The Ruth who was being reborn on that windy coast was different from the one who had arrived. She was quieter, more resilient. She had looked into the abyss of losing everything and had discovered that she could still stand. She had learned that grief and joy could coexist, that a heart could be broken and yet still find reasons to beat with quiet contentment. After 2 weeks, Clara came down for a weekend. She took one look at me and nodded in approval. "Good," she said. "The color is back in your cheeks. The deadness is gone from your eyes. You've done your mourning. Now, it's time to plan." We sat in the cottage that evening, the three of us, with a bottle of wine and a map spread out on the table. "What now, Ruth?" Clara asked. "The house is yours, secure. The law is on your side. Your sons are out of the picture, for now. What does Ruth do with the next 20 years? I looked out the window at the dark, churning sea. For so long my future had been a narrow, dreaded path leading to the Oaks. Now, it was a wide-open horizon. "I don't know," I said, and for the first time, the words were filled with excitement, not fear. "I could travel. I could sell the house and buy a smaller place here, by the sea. I could volunteer. I could do anything." "Exactly," Clara said, a rare, genuine smile on her face. "You are free, truly free, not just from David, but from the expectations of what a woman your age is supposed to be and do. You have outsmarted them all, and now you get to write the last chapter of your story on your own terms." The thought was intoxicating. The victory wasn't just about keeping a house. It was about claiming a life. When Grace and I drove back home a few days later, the house didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt like a launch pad. The memories were still there, but they no longer had the power to chain me to the past. They were part of my history, not my destiny. I unlocked the door and walked inside. The silence was still there, but it was a different kind of silence. It was a peaceful silence, a waiting silence. It was the sound of a blank page. I had won my war. Now, I was going to enjoy my peace. Building a new life is like learning to walk after a long illness. Your muscles are weak, your balance is off, and every step feels strange and deliberate. The first few weeks back were disorienting. The fight had been my purpose, my full-time job. Now I had to find a new rhythm. I started small. I joined a book club at the local library. The first meeting, I was nervous. These were women whose lives were filled with husbands, children, careers. What would I talk about? But I went, and I discovered that the discussion of a novel could transport you away from your own problems. I found myself arguing passionately about a character's motivation, and for 2 hours, I didn't think about David or Mark or court orders. I started volunteering one morning a week at the botanical gardens, deadheading flowers and weeding. It was quiet, methodical work. My hands in the soil, the smell of damp earth and greenery, it was a therapy no doctor could prescribe. I was nurturing life, not just defending it. I even, tentatively, started seeing a therapist. Dr. Evans had recommended it. "You've been through a profound trauma, Ruth," he'd said. "Family betrayal is one of the deepest wounds. Don't try to carry it alone." It was in that safe, quiet room that I began to unpack the mountain of grief and anger. I talked about Robert. I talked about the bright-eyed young man David used to be. I talked about the crushing weight of the guilt, and slowly, piece by piece, I began to lay the burden down. My social life began to reknit itself. But the pattern was different. The friends who had believed David's poison kept their distance, and I let them. The ones who had stood by me, or who had come to see the truth, became my new inner circle. I had dinners with Grace and Clara. I went to the cinema with a few women from the book club. It was a quieter, more chosen family. The house, too, began to change. I didn't make any drastic renovations, but I started to reclaim it for myself. I turned Robert's study into a sitting room for me, filling the bookshelves with my favorite novels and travel guides. I didn't erase him. I simply made space for myself beside his memory. One day, I was in the garden, the overgrown garden David had derided, and I saw a rosebush Robert had planted for our 20th anniversary. It was choked with weeds. I got down on my knees and began to carefully clear around it, untangling the vines, giving it light and air. It felt like a metaphor for my own life. I was clearing away the neglect, the bitterness, the pain, to make room for something beautiful to grow again. This was my new normal. It wasn't the life I had planned. It was lonelier than I had imagined my golden years would be. There were still moments of sharp, unexpected pain, a song on the radio, a child's laugh that reminded me of my boys, the sight of a father and son in the park. But there was also a deep, solid peace. The peace of self-possession. The peace of knowing that every decision I made, from what to have for dinner to whether to book a trip to Italy, was mine and mine alone. I was the architect of my days. I was no longer Ruth, the victim. I was Ruth, the survivor. I was Ruth, the woman who tended her garden, read her books, and answered to no one. The world had tried to put me in a small, tidy box labeled old and useless, and I had broken out, building a life that was too large, too wild, and too free to ever be contained again. A year to the day after the court hearing, the reckoning came. It was a stormy autumn afternoon, the wind whipping golden leaves against the window panes. I was baking, something I'd started to enjoy again, filling the house with the warm, comforting smell of cinnamon and apples. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping my hands on my apron, I went to the door. And there he was. David. He stood on the porch, soaked from the rain, his shoulders slumped. He looked older, diminished. The arrogant, polished man was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out version. He held no briefcase, no lawyer. He was just a man, standing in the rain. We stared at each other through the storm door. A year of silence stretched between us, a chasm of legal papers and bitter words. "Mom," he said, his voice ragged. Can I come in?" Every instinct told me to say no, to close the door, to protect the peace I had fought so hard to build. But something in his eyes, a raw, unvarnished despair, made me hesitate. I unlocked the storm door and pushed it open. He stepped inside, dripping onto the welcome mat. We stood in the hallway, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock and the drumming of the rain on the roof. He began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "I lost everything, Mom." I didn't speak, I just waited. "Chloe left me," he said, the words torn from him. "She took the kids. She said she couldn't live with what I'd become, what I'd done." He ran a hand through his wet hair. "The legal fees, they wiped out our savings. I had to take a second mortgage on the house. And then I lost my job. Downsizing, they said. But I think word got around. About the lawsuit. About trying to put my own mother in a home." He looked around the hallway, at the home he had tried so hard to take from me. "I have nothing left, nothing." There was no triumph in that moment. No schadenfreude, just a profound, aching sadness. This was my son, the boy I had sung to sleep, whose feverish brow I had cooled, whose graduation I had cheered for. And he had destroyed his life with his own greed and ambition. "I am sorry, David," I said, and I meant it. "I am sorry for your pain." He looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate confusion. "Aren't you going to say I told you so? Aren't you going to gloat?" "No," I said softly. "That's not who I am. And I don't think it's who you are, either. Not deep down." Tears welled in his eyes, and he looked away, ashamed. "Why did you do it, Mom? Why did you fight me so hard? Was the house really worth all of this?" And there it was, the fundamental misunderstanding. He still thought it was about the bricks and mortar. "It was never about the house, David," I said, my voice steady. It was about my right to choose. It was about you seeing me as a person, not a problem. It was about you respecting the life your father and I built together. You didn't want to help me, David. You wanted to manage me. You wanted to erase me. The truth of my words hit him like a physical blow. He swayed on his feet. I thought I was doing the right thing, he whispered. I know you did, I said. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You were so sure you were right, that you never stopped to listen, you never stopped to see me. He was crying openly now, great, heaving sobs that shook his frame. I didn't go to him. I didn't hug him. The wound was too deep for a simple band-aid of maternal comfort. He had to feel this. He had to understand the devastation he had wrought. After a long time, he wiped his face with his sleeve, looking broken and very, very young. What do I do now, Mom? He asked, a lost little boy. I can't tell you that, David, I said. You have to find your own path back. But it starts with honesty, with yourself, most of all. He nodded, slowly. He looked at me one more time, a long, searching look, as if he were seeing me, the real me, for the first time in years. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, and this time it sounded like it came from a place of genuine remorse, not self-pity. I am so sorry. Then he turned, opened the door, and walked back out into the rain. I closed the door and leaned against it, my own tears finally falling. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was a reckoning. The consequences of his actions had finally, brutally, caught up with him. The karma that Clara had always spoken of had arrived, not with a dramatic twist, but with the quiet, crushing weight of a ruined marriage, a lost job, and a profound loneliness. I had outsmarted him in court, but life had outsmarted him in the end. And as I stood in my quiet, warm house, the smell of apple cake filling the air, I knew that the final, most important lesson had been learned, not by me, but by him. The cost of betrayal is everything you hold dear. The days after David's visit were heavy with a strange, unresolved tension. The reckoning had happened, but there was no closure, only a fresh wound. I had seen the consequences of his actions, and while I felt no pleasure in his suffering, a part of me felt a grim sense of justice. He had sown the wind, and now he was reaping the whirlwind. Clara, when I told her, was characteristically unsentimental. Karma is not a sudden lightning bolt, Ruth. It's a slow, grinding wheel. It crushes you by inches. He is experiencing the natural and logical outcome of his own choices. Do not let his suffering become your new burden. But it was hard not to. He was my son. The instinct to comfort, to fix, was a deep, primal pull. Yet I knew that any help I offered now would be misinterpreted. It would be seen as a victory, as my capitulation, or worse, as a resource to be exploited once again. His apology felt real, but trust, once shattered, is not so easily glued back together. I thought about Mark. I wondered if David had gone to him too, in his despair. I wondered if my younger son was also witnessing the bitter harvest of their alliance. I missed him with a constant, dull ache. His birthday came and went, and I sent a card to his studio, but I heard nothing in return. The silence was his answer. My own life, in contrast, continued to bloom in its quiet way. I took a painting class. I went on a week-long trip to the Lake District with my book club. I was living the life of a vibrant, engaged woman, a life David had been so sure I was incapable of managing. One afternoon, I was working in the botanical gardens when I saw a familiar figure standing by the ornamental pond. It was Chloe. She was watching her 2 children, my grandchildren, feed the ducks. My heart clenched. I hadn't seen them in over a year. They had grown so much. She saw me and tensed. I gave a small, tentative wave. After a moment's hesitation, she walked over, leaving the children by the water. Ruth, she said. She looked tired, but there was a new calmness in her eyes. Hello, Chloe. They've gotten so big. They have. She paused, twisting the strap of her handbag. I heard David came to see you. He did. I'm sorry for my part in all of this, she said, the words coming out in a rush. I was wrong. I was scared of him, and I was greedy for the life I thought we could have. I am so ashamed. It was a full, unvarnished apology, more than I had ever gotten from David. Thank you, Chloe. That means a lot. The divorce is almost final, she continued. I'm moving back to my hometown with the kids. I need a fresh start, away from all of this. I nodded, my heart breaking a little more. My grandchildren would be moving away, another loss. Would it be okay if I brought the kids to say goodbye before we go? She asked, her voice hesitant. They ask about you. Tears filled my eyes. I would like that very much. She gave me a sad, grateful smile and went back to her children. I watched them walk away, a little family unit fractured by the actions of the man who was supposed to be its pillar. The bitter harvest was not just David's, it was mine, too. I had my freedom, my home, my peace. But the price had been my family, the grandchildren I would see only on rare visits, the sons who were lost to me. The future I had imagined, of growing old, surrounded by family, was gone. That evening, I lit a candle and looked at the family photographs on the mantelpiece. The happy, smiling faces seemed to mock me from the past. I had won my war, but the battlefield was strewn with the casualties of my closest relationships. This was the reality of my victory. It was not a clean, happy ending. It was messy and painful and stained with loss. I had outsmarted them all, but I could not outsmart the lonely human heart. The harvest was secure, but it was, and would always be, bittersweet. 6 months passed. The seasons turned, and my life settled into its new, quiet rhythm. I had lunch with Chloe and the grandchildren before they moved away. It was a strained, but loving, goodbye. I promised to visit. They were a small, fragile thread connecting me to the family I had lost, and I held on to it tightly. The ache for Mark was a constant companion. I thought of him every day, hoping he was well, hoping he was happy. I had resigned myself to the fact that I might never hear from him again. Some wounds are too deep to heal. Then, on a bright spring morning, another letter arrived. The handwriting was Mark's. My hands trembled so violently I could barely open it. Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll even want to read this. I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away. I have been a coward, and I have failed you in every way a son can fail his mother. After the court thing, I cut myself off from everyone. I couldn't handle the pressure from David, and I was too ashamed to face you. I thought if I just buried my head in the sand, it would all go away. But it didn't. David fell apart. When he lost Chloe and the kids, and then his job, he came to me. He was a wreck. He was angry, and then he was despairing. And for the first time, I saw him without his mask. I saw the fear and the insecurity that was driving him all along. He wasn't the powerful older brother anymore. He was just a broken man. He told me everything. The whole, ugly truth. How he had planned it for years, even when Dad was alive. How he saw the house and your investments as his rightful inheritance, and he was just speeding up the process. How he manipulated me into supporting him, making me believe it was for your own good. He used me, Mom. And I let him. I am so sorry. Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it. I was so weak. I believed his version of reality because it was easier than thinking for myself. I betrayed you, and I betrayed Dad's memory. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I see everything clearly now. I see how strong you were, how brave. Dad left you those papers because he knew you were the only one with the strength to use them. He trusted you, and you proved him right. I am working on myself. I'm seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I'm so easily led, why I avoid conflict at all costs. I want to become a man you could be proud of, even if I can never be part of your life again. I love you, Mom. I always have. I was just too much of a coward to show it when it mattered most. Your son, Mark 1, read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, dripping onto the paper and smudging the ink. This was not the letter of a manipulated pawn. This was the letter of a man who had done the hard, painful work of self-examination. It was full of accountability, not excuses. He saw me. He finally saw me. The relief was so immense it was dizzying. I had lost one son to his own avarice, but it seemed I had not lost the other to his weakness. There was a chance, a fragile, precious chance, for redemption. I didn't call him immediately. I needed to sit with his words, to let them settle in my heart. He was right. Forgiveness wasn't automatic. The betrayal had been deep, but the door was no longer slammed shut and bolted. It was open, just a crack, letting in a sliver of light. A week later, I wrote him back. A short, simple letter. Dear Mark, thank you for your letter. It meant more to me than I can say. The greatest gift a parent can receive is to see their child grow into a person of integrity. It seems you are on that path. That is all I have ever wanted for you. You are my son. I love you. That has never changed, and it never will. The door is open whenever you are ready. Love, Mom. I mailed it and waited. I didn't know if he would come, or when. But for the first time in a long time, I waited with hope, not dread. The bitter harvest had yielded one small, sweet fruit after all. The story wasn't over yet. The thaw with Mark was a slow, careful process, like two nervous animals approaching each other after a long winter. He didn't show up on the doorstep. He called 2 weeks after I'd mailed my letter. Mom? His voice was hesitant, so quiet I could barely hear him. Mark, hello, dear. I got your letter. Thank you. You're welcome. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with a year of unsaid things. I was wondering, he said, if I could come over sometime. For coffee? No pressure. If you're busy, or... I'd like that, I said, my heart swelling. How about tomorrow? Tomorrow is great. Yeah? Okay. He arrived precisely on time, holding a bunch of tulips, my favorite. He looked older, more grounded. The nervous energy was still there, but it was tempered by a new thoughtfulness. We sat in the kitchen, the same place we'd had our difficult conversation about the oaks. This time, the atmosphere was different. Lighter, but charged with a fragile hope. We started with safe topics. His painting, my book club, the weather. It was stilted, but it was a start. Then he took a deep breath. I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything. I know you are, honey. No. I've been seeing David, he said, his expression pained. He's not good. He's living in a crappy apartment. He's bitter. He blames you. He blames Chloe. He blames the world. He can't see that he's the architect of his own misery. I nodded, my joy at seeing Mark tempered by the sadness of David's situation. I am sorry for his pain, but I can't fix it for him. He has to want to fix it himself. I know, Mark said, and I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just telling you where he's at. I'm trying to be there for him, but it's hard. He doesn't want help. He just wants an audience for his anger. It was a mature, clear-eyed assessment. The old Mark would have been enmeshed in David's drama, drowning alongside him. The new Mark was offering a lifeline from the safety of the shore. We talked for over 2 hours. It wasn't a full reconciliation that would take time and many more conversations, but it was a beginning. A rebuilding of trust, brick by careful brick. He started coming over every Sunday for coffee. Then, he started staying for lunch. He helped me in the garden, something he'd never had the patience for as a boy. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or the inheritance. We talked about art, about life, about his hopes for the future. We were getting to know each other again as adults, without the shadow of David between us. One Sunday, he was looking at the family photographs in the living room. He stopped at one of him and David as teenagers, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning. "I miss him," he said quietly. "I miss the brother he used to be." "I do, too," I said, standing beside him. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" Mark asked, his voice full of a brother's love and a brother's grief. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Some paths, once you start down them, are very hard to turn back from. All we can do is hope and leave the light on, for him. Mark put his arm around me, and I leaned my head on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a miracle. The ice had thawed. The long winter was over. I had one of my sons back. It wasn't the happy ending I had once dreamed of, but it was an ending I could live with, and a future I could look forward to with a heart that was no longer broken, but beautifully, resiliently whole. With Mark back in my life, a new sense of purpose began to stir within me. The fight was over. The peace was won. But what was it all for? To simply live out my days in comfortable solitude. Robert hadn't built the Haven Trust just for that. He had built it to give me freedom, and with freedom comes responsibility. I found myself thinking more and more about the future, about my legacy. The house, the money, what was its purpose now? David was lost to me. Mark was an artist, passionate but not wealthy. The trust was a significant amount of money, enough to change lives. One evening, I had Mark and the aunties over for dinner. We were in the garden, the very one David had called a hazard, now blooming gloriously under my care. The conversation turned, as it often did, to the future. "Have you thought about what you'll do with all this, Ruth?" Clara asked, gesturing around her. "The house, the investments? It's a considerable estate." "I have," I said, taking a sip of my wine, "and I think Robert would have approved. The Haven Trust was created to be a sanctuary. I want to extend that sanctuary to others." They all looked at me, intrigued. "I've been talking to Arthur Pendleton," I continued. "We're restructuring the trust. When I'm gone, the house will not be sold. It will become the Gable House, a short-term residential sanctuary for women over 50 who are facing what I faced: family conflict, financial pressure, the threat of losing their independence. They can come here for a few weeks or months, for free, to get their bearings, to receive legal and emotional support, to remember their own strength." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Ruth, that's perfect." Clara nodded, a look of deep approval on her face. "A legacy. You're turning your battlefield into a refuge for others. It's brilliant." Mark reached over and took my hand, his eyes shining. "Dad would love that, Mom. He really would. The financial assets of the trust will form an endowment to maintain the house and fund the program," I explained, feeling a surge of excitement. "And Mark, I'd like you to be on the board. You have an artist's heart. You understand struggle. You would be a compassionate voice." He looked stunned, then deeply moved. "Me? Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. "This isn't about blood inheritance. It's about an inheritance of spirit. You've earned your place." The plan filled me with an energy I hadn't felt in years. My painful experience would not be for nothing. It would be the foundation for something beautiful, something that would outlive me. The Haven Trust would fulfill its true purpose. To be a haven not just for me, but for countless women after me who needed a safe port in their own storm. I had spent so long fighting to keep my home. Now, I was giving it away. But in giving it, I was securing its soul forever. They had called me old and useless, but I was building a legacy that would echo long after I was gone. The ultimate revenge is a life lived with purpose and generosity. Today is my 67th birthday. There is no party, no store-bought cake, no gathered crowd of well-wishers with hidden agendas. I am sitting on the patio in my garden, the one Robert loved, the one I saved. A cup of tea steams on the table beside me. The morning sun filters through the leaves of the old oak tree, dappling the stone with light and shadow. In 2 days, the first resident of the Gable house will arrive. A woman named Evelyn, whose children are trying to force her into a home after her husband's death. Arthur Pendleton is handling her case. She will stay in the guest room, and we will have tea in this very spot. I will tell her my story, and she will tell me hers. We will be soldiers from the same war. Mark is coming for dinner tonight. Just the two of us. He's bringing the food, and I've baked his favorite dessert. Our relationship is different now, deeper, more honest. We have passed through the fire and found each other on the other side. I think about David sometimes. The pain is a scar now, not a wound. I hear through the grapevine that he is still adrift, still angry. I have left the light on for him, as I told Mark I would, but I no longer wait by the window. My life is too full for waiting. I look at the woman I have become. My hair is a little silver, my face has a few more lines, but my eyes are clear. They hold the wisdom of hard-won battles and the peace of self-possession. I am Ruth. I am 53, I am 67, I am every age I have ever been. I am the young bride, the devoted mother, the grieving widow, the fierce warrior, the compassionate founder. They called me old and useless. They thought I was a problem to be solved, but they were wrong. I was a seed, buried in the dark, under the weight of their expectations and their greed. And when the pressure became too great, I broke open. I sent roots deep into the earth of my own spirit, and I pushed a green shoot up through the hard-packed soil toward the Sunday I am not old. I am ancient with experience. I am not useless, I am a sanctuary. The moral of the story, my dear ones, is this: no one gets to define you but you. No one gets to write the last chapter of your story but you. They may call you old, they may call you useless, they may try to put you in a small, tidy box, but you must remember the key. The key your true self leaves for you. The key to the locked door, the hidden strength, the friends who become family, the love that endures even betrayal. Find that key, turn it, swing the door wide, and outsmart them all. This is Auntie Ruth, signing off. Now, go and live your story. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.